She was a top model in her day, and bridesmaid to actress and princess Grace Kelly. But Carolyn Scott ended up dying homeless. Now her daughter, Nyna Giles, is bringing to light her mom's story and how she ended up in that situation due to not being diagnosed with mental health issues. Now, I first learned of Carolyn's story while visiting a museum in Steubenville during the Dean Martin Festival, and I must admit that I forgot her name, but did not forget her story. I tried to look up famous Ohioans, but nothing was ringing a bell. Fast forward to 2018, and I looked her up again. I looked model Grace Kelly, Ohio, and amazingly, I found a book was now written called The Bridesmaid's Daughter. So I reached out and told Nyna on Facebook how I found her story through Steubenville. After reading the book and doing some research, I was fascinated to hear Nyna's story. Nyna talks about in her book, The Bridesmaid's Daughter, the early childhood of her mom in Steubenville to her mom becoming friends with Princess Kelly. But, of course, life gets complicated. After Nyna was born, her mom has postpartum psychosis and it went untreated. Nyna would miss a lot of school because of her mom. She would say that she was sick, and being a kid, you believe what your mom says. So she was held back and given tutors, and sometimes no tutors at all. So I talked with Nyna through FaceTime about her book and her mom's health. Hello!
Hello!
Nice
Let me
to
know
meet
if
you.
it looks okay.
Yes. I'll just jump right into what is postpartum psychosis, and how did you figure out that's probably what your mom had?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was fortunate enough to meet with Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, who's the chair of psychiatry at Columbia. And I shared my mother's story with him, and, you know, after going over all of the records and everything that I knew, that, you know, that was the conclusion that we came to. And then afterwards, there were so many things, so many pieces that fell into place, you know, just given that as a possible diagnosis. Everything really went wrong after my birth. You can see it in pictures of my mother. She was happy and smiling, you know, when before I was born, and then just 6 months later, you're looking at pictures of her, and it's, you know, like she was gone. And because of the birth, excuse me, the type of birth that I had, cesarean and hysterectomy at the same time, there's really no way that she could have escaped some form of, you know, postpartum disorder. And so with postpartum psychosis, you know, the big difference is the break from reality. And just because also someone is experiencing psychosis doesn't mean that it's all the time. I also think she was able to function for a while and sort of stay under the radar because she did have help for the first 5 years.
Now, what I found interesting is that your mom refused help when she was on the streets. Did she ever talk to you about why? I know that the postpartum psychosis was a big factor in that, but did she, like you talked to her while she was in the shelter, so did she ever talk about why she was more comfortable living on the streets?
Well, it was hard to have a rational conversation with her at that point. I think it's also important to clarify, you know, I think that she experienced this, you know, with a postpartum disorder, or, you know, after I was born. And then what happened was her mental health continued to deteriorate and decline. So by the time that she was living in the shelter, she was, you know, it'd been years, just years of no treatment, no support. And she was pretty far gone, really, at that point. I, at one point, met with or talked to a social worker that knew her during a few of her years at the shelter. And she felt that my mother, in some ways, was at peace. She felt that it might have been easier for her to be, sort of anonymous in a room with 100 women versus, having a roommate in one room, which is what ended up happening later on when she was in an adult nursing home. And she had established kind of a routine for herself. She loved New York City. She found a way to go back to where, she was happiest, and went to the library, listened to classical music on headphones and free ballet performances, and walked the streets, where she lived her dream years and years ago.
I mean, it's sad, but it sounds like she was enjoying life in her own way.
Yeah. In some ways, it's very hard for a family member,
Right.
To accept that, and, to think, she wasn't really safe.
Right.
But she was never sleeping on the streets or anything like that.
Right.
She was
Yeah.
in a shelter that was for women 55 years and
Yes.
older, specifically with a diagnosis of mental illness. The other thing is, they tried to get her housing. She would not participate with any of the process that you have to go through. But I think that's typical too for people with mental illness.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
So,
she needed somebody to intervene, and that's just not how it worked then. It's not even how it necessarily works now.
Okay. That's unfortunate, but at the same time, you knew where she was, and you
Yes.
were
Mm-hmm.
taking care of her the best you could. So kudos to you. And the reason I found out about your mom is I visited Steubenville, and you know this. I told you, I reached out, and so when you went to Steubenville for research, did you find that many people still knew who she was and had stories to tell?
Yes, well, the people, yeah, because I met with relatives, and I met with several people at the Historical Society. So it was a very special weekend. Just realizing, that they thought of her as their queen and honored her all these years, and had kept folders with all of these articles and magazine covers. It was a treasure trove, really, for my co-author and I. When we were writing the book, we found out so much from that visit.
That's really cool that they kept all these records, because that is how I found out about Carolyn. Is I was visiting for the Dean Martin Festival, and her story stuck with me. So did your mom? I know that she didn't have maybe the nicest childhood, but did she have warm memories from Ohio?
Well, yes, I interviewed her very close cousins, and they told me wonderful memories that they had of Christmas, and what their sort of Christmas morning would have been like, and how it was a big family because my grandmother had 9 siblings, and all of the cousins would get together. They went to church together. They had family gatherings. They didn't have a lot of money, but as very young children, they probably were not so aware of that. They were just aware of having this big family. And it was important for her cousins to share that with me, that she did have, some happiness in childhood. She was very close to this one particular cousin, Patricia, to her parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that maintained, sort of, even after she left New York, she would call them.
That's really cool that she kept in touch, because I wouldn't
Much
have,
harder back then.
right, I wouldn't have guessed
Yeah.
that she kept in touch that much, but that's really cool. So what kind of stories did your mom share with you about either her past, whether it be Ohio or with Princess Grace?
She shared some of her childhood, but not a lot. It's difficult for me to remember, really. I wish now, thinking back, that I had asked her more, because I think that the past was pretty clear for her. So anything I asked her about, she probably would have told me. She did tell me, stories of when she was modeling, and she was so proud that she worked with Richard Avedon and Scabullo. She would mention them, going to the ballet with Grace and theater. And they had this wonderful, glamorous life. She would tell me things about, I did a photo shoot in Paris, and, that
nice.
kind, the highlights,
right,
things that
exactly.
she was very proud of.
Everybody wants to share the highlights. That's what social media is for now.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you said that your mom and you said Grace Kelly had an affair with your father. Did that cause more of a rift between your parents, or was that rift kind of already there at that time, or do you know?
I don't really know all the details. I only know sort of what my mother told me. So it's difficult for me to elaborate on that if I don't, have all the facts.
Right.
I'm sure it wasn't a good thing, but again, I can't tell you, exactly when it happened or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just is what it is. You gotta take it for what it's worth.
What I do know, what's important to me, is I know that whatever happened, I know that my mother, loved Grace to her death, and forgave her for whatever happened. There was no lingering resentment. I mean, when we talked, she always talked about Grace with a lot of love, and I think she really missed that friendship, because that friendship for her, at that time in her life when she was the happiest, she was her closest friend.
So, before Grace died, you said that she was planning on meeting your mom. Is that correct?
Well, she was planning on moving to, getting an apartment in New York City. Okay. And my mother would have, so they would have gotten together.
And do you think that would have, helped your mom get help? Would Grace have been able to convince her, since they were such close friends?
It's very hard to say, because when somebody's that ill, you couldn't really have a completely rational conversation with her. I think it would have been good for her to have someone who knew her way back when and was close to her, but, I really have no idea what would have happened. I know that my older sister had reached out to Grace, and she said that she would, try to do what she could do, and if she'd been in New York City, I'm sure they would have somehow seen each other. But we'll never know.
Right. I hate to keep playing the what if game, but knowing what you know now, what would you do to help your mom, even if you couldn't have gotten her help? Would there be things that you would have changed?
Well, yes. I mean, there are a lot of things I wish I had done differently, but it's also very easy to say that now. My kids are grown,
right.
At the time that she was in the shelter, I had 3 young children, and one was having seizures, sometimes 11 a day. So I had, a very, complicated life myself. When I did get involved with my mother's care, and she developed this, heart condition, that is when she was moved into an adult home on Long Island.
Right.
Maybe if I had gotten involved sooner in that, but ultimately it really was the health condition that got her out. I mean, my mother needed, she needed care after I was born,
Yeah.
mental health care back then that she just
Right.
didn't get.
It needed to catch it early, and otherwise it would have.
Yeah.
It was all just downhill. Okay. You did say in your book that even in the hospital, your mom missed the New York streets. What connection did she have with New York that had her drew her in?
Well, those were the happiest years of her life. I have no doubt. She was the small town girl who came to New York and made it big and was enormously successful. And she loved the culture, ballet. She took ballet lessons, when she arrived there. And I mean, it must have been an amazing, amazing experience. And I don't think she ever lost sight of the wonder of what she was going through, that she was this small town girl, like, experiencing all of these wonderful new things. I think her home life as a teenager may not have been the happiest with her stepfather, and I think escaping, and going to New York and being able to be on her own and independent financially, that was it.
That was
Everything that I know about her years in New York City as a model and even as a young married woman, those were very happy times.
That's really, I mean, that's kind of like the American dream right there, going from a small town to like being able to be financially independent on your own and successful. So
yeah, exactly. The American dream.
The American dream.
And for her, she never wanted to go back to Steubenville. It wasn't an option for her. And I don't really believe that she was ever fully happy on Long Island. She felt that the house that my father built and, was cold and wasn't homey. And, she didn't make a lot of friends out there and sort of embrace the new life.
So do you think recent awareness for mental health is getting more people with mental health conditions to get help, or is it still just as taboo as ever, or somewhere in between?
Probably somewhere in between. I mean, we certainly have come a long way since, my mother's days when I was born. I just find it so encouraging that, just like I'm doing, sharing my story, I've been inspired by others who've shared their stories, and hopefully I inspire more people to do the same. But it's everywhere, just the idea of sharing your story. I can say, that from my experience in doing this, I've been met with nothing but kindness, compassion everywhere I turn. So these are, things that I never wanted to talk about to anybody all these years. And,
Right.
It's only made me happier and more comfortable. I think, people are so often ashamed, but there's a lot of support out there. And another thing is, just in telling my story, I found I would talk to people I've known for years, 35 years, and didn't know they had a brother that was schizophrenic or something like that. Everybody has a story. It's 1 in 4, with mental illness. So it's so much more common than we realize. It really is important, to talk about it.
So your mom kept you out of school a lot. What was your education experience after you left home?
Okay, after I left home, I moved into New York City with my sister, who was 22. I was 14 at the time. And I went to a private school, road school, on 54th Street in Manhattan. And it was wonderful. I was on the honor roll. I had 2 good years there, where I really put in the effort. I was just, a sponge, wanting to soak up every bit of education that I could get.
Did you find it difficult to catch up? That's amazing that you were able to be on the honor roll after so long of being kind of held back and kept at home, homeschooling and that kind of thing. Did you find it difficult to catch up?
Well, It's really hard to say. When I think about it, I don't understand how I was able to do that. I know there were certain things that were hard at that point. It was hard for me, and it got harder as I went along to write a report. There were gaps in my education, but learning something completely new, like studying Spanish, starting fresh with everybody else, no problem. Algebra was a whole new thing. Starting fresh, it was fine. Mm-hmm. I was, very good with tests and that kind of thing. Or just organizing thoughts was hard. That's something you learn, in school. So there are many gaps still. Yeah.
So, besides being an author, what else do you do for work? Because obviously you've turned out fine. So, what was your career path afterward?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had a 20-year career in advertising, sales, marketing, which I got into after my youngest. I have 3 children. After my youngest turned 5, then I started to develop my own career, and that I'm very grateful to have had that. That was wonderful. About 2 years ago, I got involved in my husband's company. He runs his own public relations company, so I'm COO of the company, and I handle, administrative types of things. That it's a very flexible position for me right now, but I really enjoy being involved in his company.
That's really cool. So have you found that the advertising helps with advertising for your book?
Well, sure. Yes, because I spend so much time in that world. Today a lot of it is about social media, just being out there and networking. Mm-hmm. I'm just so naturally interested in mental health advocacy that I've been to 3 conferences this summer: mm-hmm. Mental Health America, NAMI, and then the Postpartum Support International Conference, and it's been amazing. I've met so many wonderful people, and it just makes you feel good to know that there are so many people out there on so many different levels trying to help the cause of mental health advocacy, and it's great. There's a lot being done.
That's incredibly good to know. Did the writing process bring you any closure or make you feel closer to your mom?
Oh, so much closer. She was this big mystery before. I just didn't understand. I didn't understand her. And now I feel like I really understand what happened in her life. And I have so much appreciation for the fact that she never gave up. With all of the stress that she had and what she was going through and the challenges that she faced, she still did get up every day and take care of me in her own way. Mm-hmm. I just love that I've been able to research her entire career. That has become such a passion. The entire 8-year career, over 450 images and covers, and I have them framed around the house. That's a wonderful thing. And, if that's one of the things I wish I could change, if I could go back and, mm-hmm. Talk to her about that. If I'd been able to research it and bring her the magazines and show her, I wish that she just, could know how proud I am of her.
I think that would have been good for any mom to see. Every mom wants to know that their kids are proud of them. Mm-hmm.
And that's something I never felt about my mother. I never felt proud of her. It just wasn't part of the equation. And now it is. And that's a beautiful thing, really.
I'm sure she would definitely be beaming with pride. So, are you going to write any more books?
Well, I have thought about writing about my daughter's, story, what it's like to raise a child who's developmentally disabled and has mental health issues. That's a thought down the road. My sister Robin, who died in 1979, was a singer-songwriter, and just in an amazing era, the early 70s in South Philly, that I just think would be such a great story to dig into.
I think your sister's story would make such a good book. Your sister was so interesting. So I think that would be a good book option. And I mean, the book isn't about your sister, but she is definitely a key central part in your story, and also your mom seems to really laugh around her, and so that was interesting to learn about her. So going back to the Steubenville connection, what were your impressions of Steubenville when you went there did you just go for like a weekend, or was it like a week?
Yeah, it was a short trip. We actually, my co-author and I planned the trip all around going to the Jefferson Historical Association, and then found out that two of the cousins, 85 and 92, were going to be just a 4.5-hour drive away. So we flew to Steubenville, and then the next day got up and drove in the snow all the way to Lebanon, Ohio.
Oh, in the snow.
Yes.
To Lebanon, Ohio. I've never even heard of Lebanon, Ohio.
Yeah, and it was just wonderful. We spent most of the day with them, and just what they were able to share was truly amazing. Then we went back, and we really didn't have much time to sort of explore. I'm going to go back because I've been, with this extended family now that I've gotten to know. They've told me a lot of interesting things about the family history, so I do want to go back. I did go to the street where she grew up, and, that was interesting because I did visit there as a young child.
Yeah. So, out of my own curiosity about Steubenville and your mom, there's only two people I know from Steubenville that are famous. Your mom and Dean Martin. Did your mom enjoy his music because of that connection?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, we listen to a lot of Dean Martin at home.
Makes me so happy.
Yeah.
I was like the youngest person there that was not dragged by their parents.
To hear it, yeah. Oh, I love that era.
Oh, yes. Me too. Obviously, I went to the Dean Martin Festival. How we have a common connection. How did Charlie Green end up helping you? Because without him, I would not know about Carolyn.
I had heard somewhere along the line, somewhere along the way that that Steubenville did have some, photos and things of my mother, and that they did sort of honor her in some way. So I called him to find out, and then was so pleasantly surprised because I just had no idea, really. And they had even honored her at different times over the years. And, it's just so sad that I didn't know about it, because I would have definitely been there for it. And Charlie was just amazing. He had so much information. It was incredible, really, things that I really would never have known about otherwise. There's just no way. I would never have found out.
He's a very passionate fellow.
Yes. Oh, her yearbook they had, the letter from Ed Koch, just when Doug Applegate and Bill Crosby tried to bring their queen back, to Steubenville. Amazing things, really.
That is incredibly cool.
Oh, and he also sent me, not too long ago, he sent me actual footage of the Sesquicentennial parade with my mother, which is it's incredible. I mean, they're close-up shots.
Oh my
had it converted for me and sent it to me. Yeah, amazing.
That is cool. Is there anyone that you want to give a shout out to before we sign off and say our thank yous?
Well, I mean, just in general, I am so grateful to all of the people I've been hearing from. Really, just a day doesn't go by that I don't get a message from somebody, who's read the book and the story has touched them in some way. And honestly, it really is what keeps me going, because it's hard, just going back and thinking about the sadness of her life. But, sometimes I think, what am I doing?
Right.
But when I realized that it really, it has touched someone else's life or inspired them in some way, that makes it all worthwhile. And I just feel like I've got to keep following my heart, and I'm on the right path.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love that it touches people. It definitely, it touched me, and I'm sure it's touched many of other people. So I hope you continue writing, whether it's about your sister or your kids. I love it. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Thanks. I don't even know how to end this because I'm just overwhelmed.
Oh,
thanks,
well,
Nyna.
I'm so grateful that you reached out.
I was so surprised that you responded.
I'm happy to talk to anybody who's genuinely taken an interest in the story. Mm-hmm. That's what it's all about. Really.
I don't know if you know this, but you're the reason why I'm starting the podcast. Because
really?
Yes, because when you messaged me, I had just kind of said I've been thinking about doing classic Hollywood because I love that era.
Yes.
And you were like, let's do it. And I was like, I guess I have a podcast now. And it's been so fulfilling. I've interviewed I've interviewed a college professor that is a fan of Jack Benny. I've interviewed someone that does a podcast that I've been a long time listener of for Johnny Carson. So I'm just so glad. It's kind of amazing how just one visit in 2017 to a museum has...
Isn't that great?
Yes, it's been so fulfilling. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm grateful to the museum that they honor her, that way. It was so cool to hear that they mentioned her and all of that. Yeah.
Right. It was, I was just there for the Dean Martin Festival, and everybody was kind of shuffling by, but Charlie was so great because he saw that I was genuinely interested, and I was so young. He was like, "You're so young." He's like, and so he just started showing me everything about Steubenville, and they even took me. He's like, "I don't do this anymore," but took me to the basement. And
oh, really?
Yes.
Oh,
he took
wow.
Me, yeah, and there was a train there, and so he somebody in Steubenville had designed this train that just runs all around the basement, and so showed me that. That was incredibly cool. So if anybody's listening from Steubenville, ask to go to the basement.
Interesting. Well, I may end up back there one day. I'm going to make sure he takes me to the basement.
All right. Thank you so much, Nyna.
Thank you, Hope.
Many thanks to Nyna Giles and Charlie Green for a year ago telling me about Carolyn. I urge you to read The Bridesmaid's Daughter. Everyone I've told about the story has been really interested. It's a really interesting story, so I recommend it for a book club and your next read. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you later. I'm also holding a contest. If you take a picture of you subscribed to All of the Classics podcast or YouTube channel, you can receive 3 Bodycology creams and 3 fragrance mists. Again, send that picture of you subscribed to the podcast or YouTube channel and share it with me on Instagram at True Travels of Hope or my Twitter, True Hope Sears, and I will message the winner. Other rules that apply: the package has to be sent within the U.S. This has been a Hope Sears presentation, darling.